Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar today. This is a webinar being presented by a Clean Energy Group, and the topic for today's webinar is solar and battery storage to support community preparedness and disaster response. And we have an excellent panel of guest speakers with us today, but before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over a few webinar logistics. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so your webcam and microphone are disabled. You can submit questions and comments via the questions panel. We'll be saving 15 minutes after the presentations for a dedicated Q&A. So please submit your questions as the webinar is going on. You don't have to wait till the end. Speaker bios are available in the materials section. Automated captions are also available. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. We will email you a webinar recording within 48 hours, and it will also be posted on Clean Energy Group's website at cleanegroup.org/webinars. So you will have access to the webinar recording and slides after the webinar. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for today, my colleague, Marriele Mango.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Marriele Mango. I'm a project director at Clean Energy Group. Clean Energy Group is a nationwide nonprofit organization with the mission to provide and support affordable, reliable, clean energy for all. Our work focuses in quite a few buckets. We do a lot of education building through webinars like this, as well as reports that kind of vary for super technical to more broad awareness building. We work in we work in policy. We also have buckets of technical assistance that I'll jump into. I really encourage you to check out our website to learn more. Next slide, please. So Clean Energy Group, I'm the project director for the Resilient Power Project, which focuses pretty exclusively on supporting the advancement of equitable solar and battery storage technologies, specifically in historically marginalized communities and medically vulnerable communities. We work a lot. We have some of our partners highlighted here, including Footprint Project, who will be chatting with us today. And part of this work includes the Technical Assistance Fund, which is on the next slide. So the Technical Assistance Fund is a small grant and one-on-one support program offered through Clean Energy Group. Folks that are either community-based organizations or community-serving facilities like health centers or institutions of faith or community centers, really anywhere that the community relies on for support during regular operations and would like to continue relying on in the event of an outage, are provided support through the Technical Assistance Fund and actually talking through and getting a solar and storage feasibility analysis for how Resilient Power can support their facility. If you're interested in learning more about it or applying, it is a program that's providing grant support and one-on-one assistance year-round. I encourage you to check out the Technical Assistance Fund website and fill out our intake form. This is just to highlight that the Technical Assistance Fund is celebrating 10 years of operating. We just hit our 2 million mark as well, and grants awarded to community serving and community-based organizations. And we're looking forward to continuing to provide this program for another 10 years. Next slide, please. So with that, I wanted to quickly introduce our webinar speakers. I will hop back on at the end to moderate our Q&A, and I'll let them take it from here. We have Joshua Cox, who is the CEO of Community Power South. He completed his undergraduate degrees at Yale University, where he was a 4-year letterman on the varsity baseball team and won the coveted William Neely Mallory Award. After 2 years in the classroom, Josh realized that poverty and the problems that accompany it are the biggest barriers to reducing inequality, and he left to attend the University of Pennsylvania Law School and Fell's Institute of Government to better understand how the law influences politics, finance, and government. From 2022 to 2025, Josh ran Resilience Works, a national labor brokerage dedicated to building the workforce America needs to adapt and respond to climate change. Resilience Works connects workers to disaster restoration companies after natural disasters in the Gulf South and organizations in Sonoma County preventing wildfires through vegetation management. Now, Josh is the CEO of Community Power South, a nonprofit solar development corporation in New Orleans. Using federal and state incentives, Community Power South helps churches, schools, and other community institutions become resilience hubs, installing solar and battery storage systems that decarbonize the grid and ensure those buildings do not lose power after a hurricane. We also have Will Heegaard on from Footprint Project. He's the operations director. Will sees every disaster as an opportunity to build back greener. Before founding Footprint Project, Will worked as a paramedic in Minneapolis, where he deployed with International Medical Corps to install solar refrigeration in West Africa during the Ebola outbreak, and volunteered with Team Rubicon after disasters in Louisiana, Minnesota, and Puerto Rico. Will received his BA in Peace and Conflict Studies from University of California, Berkeley. So I'm going to start with passing it over to Josh, and we'll go from there. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks so much for that intro, Mari. Hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be here. My name is Josh Cox, and I lead Community Power South. Like Mari mentioned, Community Power South is a nonprofit renewable energy development organization that bridges the trust divide, that it can allow nonprofits and other civic institutions to take advantage of the current solar incentives and to have those kinds of technologies installed on their structures. Community Power South is a brand new organization. In fact, I haven't even formally started running it yet, but a lot led up to the creation of Community Power South, and that's largely what my presentation is going to be about today. But before I dive into everything that led up to Community Power South, I want to start by anchoring the presentation in a personal story. In August of 2021, my wife and I had our first daughter. She was born on August 25th, 2021. When we were released from the hospital 2 days later, Hurricane Ida was barreling towards New Orleans. It was a Category 4 storm. And we were released from the hospital at such a time that we didn't actually have the option to evacuate. So we were stuck in the city and had to figure out a place to, safely ride out the storm. We ended up going to a hotel, and it was a hotel that I actually felt really good about because I'd heard that this hotel didn't lose power during Hurricane Katrina. Nonetheless, Hurricane Ida was a Category 4 storm, and it knocked every power line into the Mississippi River, causing mass power outages throughout the entire city that lasted for longer than 7 to 10 days. This was an incredibly trying time, as you can imagine. The images that are seared in my mind are one of a 90-year-old woman being carried down the steps of the hotel. Another image that's seared in my mind is of my wife carrying our newborn down 13 flights of steps and being filled with the anxiety of trying to figure out what we were going to do next. This story, however, isn't rare. A lot of families, a lot of individuals who are New Orleanians were really struggling in that moment. And I think ultimately, a lot of community organizations realized that they had a role to play in saving themselves. Obviously, government has responsibilities. Obviously, emergency personnel have responsibilities. But ultimately, communities can save themselves. And so a group named Together New Orleans organized a mix of churches, and they realized that by installing solar installations, it could be an opportunity to create resilient hubs all across the city. Like I mentioned, power outages are a huge cause of death. Next slide. In Louisiana and Texas and Mississippi, these power outages have caused tremendous damage. Next slide. In New Orleans during Hurricane Ida, I believe 30 of the 36 deaths that were experienced were due to power outages. In Texas, when Texas experienced the winter storm, that caused 700 deaths. Um, in Hurricane Laura, 19 out of the 31 deaths that were experienced in Louisiana, I believe, were caused from power outages. And so, like I mentioned, community organizations have a role to play in making sure that they're as disaster ready as possible. And so, Together New Orleans launched the Community Lighthouse Project. And the Community Lighthouse Project, the goal is to use um, all of the braided resources, federal, state, local debt products, to be able to put solar installations on churches, on community institutions like schools that we know aren't going to go anywhere, so that there is a place that is within a 15-minute walking distance for everyone in the city of New Orleans to go to when there is a storm. Here's how it works. Next slide. During normal times, the solar installation and the battery array, they help decarbonize the grid and defray electricity costs. But when the storm comes and power is out, the solar array kicks into gear and allows for certain particular parts of that building to maintain power, which is critical in providing a couple of key survival pieces. Next slide. The first is food and water. You know, in New Orleans after Hurricane Ida, I can't tell you how many folks came home to fridges full of spoiled food. And at the same time, it's not like there were tons of grocery store options in an area that had just been hit really hard by a hurricane. So the ability to house food and to house to power like large refrigerators is something that can really keep a community going. The second is heating and cooling centers. I don't know if you all have experienced the New Orleans summer, but without air conditioning, it's actually dangerous. And so these solar arrays allow for at least one major room, if not more, in a church complex to be air conditioned and to be at a temperature that vulnerable folks or young folks can manage. The next is charging stations. Staying in communication, understanding the logistics of what's happening within the context of a storm is critical, and that only happens if phones and tablets have electricity. Lastly, portable battery exchange. One of the ways that my family made it through was through having these portable solar batteries. And so, you know, in the future, one of the things that we're considering is how to create a project where batteries can be dispersed within communities when a storm hits, so that for folks who can't actually walk the 15 minutes, there are still ways of delivering life-saving power. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now, this idea was so powerful that it ended up getting grassroots support. Next slide, please. A host of local, federal, and even state incentives help to create the conditions to start to actually put lighthouses onto church structures. Like the slide says, Together New Orleans was able to raise $12 million in the pilot phase. $3.5 million came from the local city government. There was a congressional allocation of $3.8 million. And then with the remainder being managed by, financing and other philanthropic grants. Go to the next slide, please. One of the things to remember here is that the IRA has truly been a game changer for nonprofit entities that are trying to install solar arrays. Um, the tax credits um, and the ability to count on those rebates have really allowed for local governments and other municipalities to allocate funds knowing that those funds are going to be leveraged by the federal dollars. It's also doing the work of creating additional private sector dollars. That's happening more slowly, but creating additional private sector dollars in the form of debt that can make these projects happen more quickly and pencil. This is an example of the ribbon cutting for our first community lighthouse with local leaders. Next. This is a picture with Secretary Granholm in November of 2023. These images just sort of show you the different types of partners that were brought to bear to make the Community Lighthouse Project a success. Keep going, please. Next, I'm just going to show you an array of different projects that we've done, or that Together New Orleans has done. To date, there are 11 lighthouses that have been done in New Orleans, a total of 16 projects overall since 2022. And these projects have actually started to bear fruit and stand the test of time. Next slide. You can sort of power through these slides. There's maybe 5 or 6 more of them that just show, what the solar arrays actually look like on multiple buildings in the city. Now, yeah, this is great. Like I mentioned, we've got 11 lighthouse installations that already exist within the city of New Orleans. The goal is ultimately to get to 86 within the city, so that, any individual who no individual is farther than a 15-minute walk away from a lighthouse and from relief in the middle of a storm. Beyond simply the disaster components, though, one of the things that we're most proud of is the fact that these solar arrays are decarbonizing the grid. Next slide. As you can see, we've avoided nearly 900,000 pounds of carbon emissions through the installation of these community lighthouses. And again, like I said, not all of these lighthouses are in New Orleans, but they are all decarbonizing the grid and leading to a more green future. Next slide. So community lighthouses are slashing reliance on gas and coal, and 16 times more of their energy comes from solar. Next slide. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, okay, how did all of this happen? Because simply having federal money isn't really enough. The Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure law are great, but in New Orleans, for example, there are local utilities and there are other institutions that need to be organized in order to have the capital stack and the conditions to actually put solar arrays on nonprofit buildings, like churches. Well, the short answer is partnership. So this whole community lighthouse project is anchored in aligning the interests of multiple entities. So one of those entities is the IBEW. We view solar as an opportunity to provide good family sustaining jobs in the long term. And so we've got a long-term partnership with IBEW that helped push policy change. Next. We also needed to change the local rules. So in New Orleans, energy and utilities are managed by the city council. Before Together New Orleans and their intervention, almost no solar developments happened because the incentives did not make sense, and it wasn't a sort of sustainable business proposition. That was at the behest of actually our local utility operator. And so an organizing effort by Together New Orleans and our anchor partners got the city council to start to change the rules that actually made solar installation a more viable financial opportunity, just made it pencil. And so, that is a huge part of why the Community Lighthouse Project was able to grow like it did. Next slide. Now we're looking forward to an additional element of renewable energy, installations onto renewable energy projects. Excuse me. Community solar is an opportunity to get decarbonization into the grid while also reducing energy bills for low income people in the city of New Orleans who don't have the access or ability to put a solar installation on their own homes or structures. And so, again, this was the product, excuse me, of lots of organizing, policy change, political campaigning. And it all has culminated in a 22 acre community solar project at the Holy Family Sisters site, which we're really, really excited about because it is going to really sort of democratize the ability for folks to experience the benefits, the bill lowering benefits of solar. Next slide. The next thing that we're looking forward to, again, which is all built upon organizing and pushing our local officials, is to create a virtual power plant where now all of these structures that have solar arrays and batteries, that they can somehow be connected. And when there is an energy outage, those batteries can send energy back into the grid to reduce load and to make our energy grid more resilient. Again, that this is only something that is happening due to organizing. Now, we're a long way away from landing this plane. The details are currently being worked out, but this is something that we're actively working towards. Lastly, next slide. All of this has actually culminated in a real test that happened months ago, 3 or 4 months ago. Hurricane Francine made landfall in New Orleans. It had over 100-mile winds. If I'm not mistaken, it was a Category 2. And the power definitely went out. My power went out in my house in Mid-City for 3 days. And the community lighthouses worked beautifully. Not only did the solar arrays allow for at least 10 spaces where there was air-conditioned energy charging stations, but also Together New Orleans organized for all of these spaces to be staffed by community members. And this is a model for what needs to be happening all across the country. Regardless of whether you're in New Orleans and you're subject to hurricanes, or you are, in Chicago and maybe you're subject to snowstorms, power outages are going to happen because none of us are immune from climate change and its impacts. And so this project, Community Lighthouse, is so exciting because I believe that this is a model for how America can go about preparing for climate change and making sure that not only our structures but our people are as resilient as possible. So that's the end of my presentation.
Before we pass it over to Will, I do want everyone to know we'll be saving most of the questions for the Q&A in the end. But Josh, we had one clarification question for you on the size of
Sure.
the solar array. Was that 5 megawatts? That's the size of what was the size of the community solar array that you referenced?
Yes, 1 second. I believe it is 5 megawatts. I believe it is 5 megawatts.
Thank you. Thanks so
Yeah.
much for that great presentation, Josh. I know we already have a ton of questions. Everyone, we will get to them in the Q&A. And now we'll pass it over to Will. Please keep the questions coming in.
Hello, hi everyone. Marielle, or am I good? I'm sitting in a car in
Can see you, can
Asheville.
hear you.
Yeah, good. Okay, cool. Outside of Asheville, um, up in a small town called Mars Hill, North Carolina. I'm so thank you for, sharing our stories. We are such fans of you know, the Community Lighthouse Project. I live in New Orleans most of my time, and I plan to go charge my phone at Crescent Care if there is or when there is another outage. So, Josh, thank you for all the work you're doing there. I kind of think about Footprint Project in relation to projects like Community Lighthouse, which is truly a model for, I think, the nation in how we prepare and recover from disaster power outages. I kind of think about Footprint Project like the small mobile focused cousin of the broader network of permanent facility level grid connected microgrids that are coming online in the Louisiana area, and then hopefully can be expanded into other states as quickly as possible. Because as I think we all know, um, we are uh, we need to run as fast as we can to help communities and literally just people survive these storms. So Footprint Project is a small nonprofit we started in 2018. Our mission is to help communities build back greener after disasters by mobilizing cleaner energy infrastructure to communities in crisis. We've deployed to this type of infrastructure, meaning solar and mobile solar and batteries, and now we're also kind of working in water and shelter infrastructure as slowly kind of integrating water, power, and shelter infrastructure. And we've deployed these systems to over 25 disasters. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks. Our core programs are really kind of our bread and butter is power goes out and we rapidly mobilize cleaner energy infrastructure and now other climate tech to support first responders, second responders, which are like the Red Crosses, the Team Rubicons, the Salvation Armies of the world, the nonprofit orgs that deploy to provide services, and then community responders, the lighthouse groups and the kind of mutual aid networks and the neighborhood street corner pop-up tent, bring your water, come get free food, those types of sites. We kind of think about our work in if we can support groups that are doing the real real service work for disaster affected communities with more sustainable technologies to keep their lights on, their phones charged, their fridges cold, their their kitchens running overnight, all that type of like infrastructure work that's needed. If we can do that at no cost to the broad network of community relief groups that get activated, they can use their money and their resources and their time instead of standing in a line for fossil fuels or spending those dollars on gas generators, they can use it for expanding the services they provide for the disaster affected folks. So disaster response is our bread and butter. In between, when the lights are kind of back on, we focus on building power systems and training responders to develop new networks of mobile sustainable infrastructure for the next climate disaster response or power outage response. And then we do intake a lot of in-kind equipment, free, inverters, solar panels, batteries, other technologies that we offer as part of our upcycle program to offset the costs of long-term resilience and response projects. This is kind of a rough count of what we've done to date. We haven't even been able to update this slide because we've been too busy with Hurricane Helene last year, which is why I'm in North Carolina now. We're still doing a recovery program here, and then two of our staff are in LA for the wildfires right now, and they've supported 3 sites with mobile solar microgrids to date, and we expect that will expand in the week. We're a small team. We're 10 staff, so we're growing as fast as we can, but it is the scale of these disasters is just it consistently breaks our systems every time we think we have a system that can handle the level of site requests, the level of equipment that's coming in. It's a challenge that I think we are all collectively reeling from as we think about 2025 to 2050 and how we're gonna survive the next couple generations of this climate reality. Can you go to the next slide, please? Sorry, thank you. And you can just click through some of these things. It's basically just a little more information on what we do. We deploy these mobile systems, we provide rapid power infrastructure needs assessments, we deliver the equipment and set it up and maintain it, and then it stays in the community as long as they need it. Usually that's like this was a church in Kentucky after the Mayfield tornado, and we had a number of units sent there. And then please jump to the next one here. When the lights are back on, we do trainings, we develop, plan and give away climate tech, and then try to seed workforce opportunities that are related to mobilizing clean energy infrastructure to the next storm, which is why we're so thrilled to be speaking next to the Community Lighthouse and Gulf Power South folks. Just a rough kind of, we say like mobile solar microgrids or solar generators or battery libraries, or there's a lot of terms we use that are kind of intermingled. So I'm going to just try to define what we mean when we say, we send solar to a disaster. A lot of what we're doing is in the portable to towable range, meaning replacing small gas generators from 2 to 10 kilowatt size with mobile battery systems and solar systems that can do kind of provide a similar level of power output. Once we get into the palletized or containerized microgrid range, it's a much more heavy equipment operation. And while we have done these operations, we're deploying a number of palletized systems in LA right now. It takes a little more, installation support, and they're much more resource intensive. So a lot of the volunteer work and the way we engage folks that aren't a licensed electrician in the state where the disaster is occurring is more by moving portable systems around or deploying towable systems with, can you drive a truck and tow a trailer safely? And then if you click a couple more, Zareen, we're just adding a couple new things to our tech fleet here, our climate tech fleet. We've been testing atmospheric water generators, which provide clean drinking water by sucking basically a dehumidifier connected to a filter, to a reverse osmosis system. And we've been testing those in New Orleans, particularly. We started looking at these after the saltwater wedge crisis, which folks may or may not be familiar with. But a couple of years ago, the New Orleans was facing a potential of saltwater backfilling into the Mississippi River and cutting off drinking water for a large population. So we started looking into atmospheric water generators as a way of reducing plastic water bottle use during disasters. We're getting much more investing more in cold storage solutions to keep people cold, food cold, medical equipment or medications cold during heat wave and kind of the heat events that are adjacent to a disaster power outage. So if a hurricane hits, let's say Hurricane Beryl in Houston, there's a power outage crisis, but there's also a heat crisis on top of that, and that can get extremely dangerous, causing a number, these death counts that Josh mentioned. A lot of those are very interlinked so we know that cold storage and integrating refrigeration technologies with solar generation technologies can be life-saving. And then we've also developed a number of battery libraries, meaning just a combination of the portable systems loaded into a towable system or set up next to a palletized or containerized system that then can be used as like a lending library or a temporary mesh grid on sites that are either responders staying in a number of tents or trailers, or let's say an apartment complex where you have people that are still staying in their apartments when the power goes out and just need a battery for a fan or their fridge or something else like that. You can go to the next slide, thanks. We're just going to click through a couple pictures, so feel free to just kind of slowly click the button. These are just a number of the sites we've supported over the years with mobile clean energy infrastructure. These are some sites in Maui that were. This is really on the border of the fire line there, and then this is one of the largest mobile microgrids we've ever set up at the Napili Relief Hub in Maui. That is a 40 kilowatt, 100 kilowatt hour microgrid with 2 shipping containers and a temporary canopy to power that Matson container. To the left is a walk-in refrigerator trailer, a very big one with 3-phase power on it. All the batteries are stationed in that pod, that little white container there. And this was one of the largest mobile or semi-permanent containerized microgrids we've ever deployed. And it's still actually serving the folks in Maui. It's planning to be moved to a farm site for long-term resilience, since this hub was initially positioned in a park. So a lot of the kind of deployments that we do are rapid in the first 1 to 3 months, and then become long-term mobile infrastructure assets that are community-based and community-owned for the 3 to 5 year recovery and resilience timeline. You can keep clicking, Zorine, thanks. This is just recently in last fall. This is a setup. You can see a palletized Tesla Powerwall system that we threw on a trailer, drove up from New Orleans, and on the right side is Jamie, our program director, and a local partner, or Poder Emma. Ingrid is in the canvas jumper thing, and we wired that into a well pump to power water, to get the water well pump running for a mobile home park that ended up serving thousands of people with fresh water through the couple months of that recovery. As soon as that was our first site after Helene, or one of the first sites that we were able to get power back onto, and then the trucks could start running to that pump to fill up water and deliver it to 3 other mobile home parks in the area. So I just love how this stuff if you can get the power on, you can get cell service on, you can get water on, you can start getting the infrastructure pieces back up for groups that can then expand their services drastically really fast. So a lot of what we're doing is identifying local community resilience orgs really quickly, and then providing them the tech and the service, the technical support to just keep their lights on so they can do what they do best and serve the community. This is a neighborhood resilience hub that was set up outside of someone's home that was flooded. The water line here in this photo when Hurricane Helene ripped through western North Carolina was up to the stair level of that home. So all of the river, all these businesses and homes were affected. And this palletized system you can see in the back right with that gray box was running fans for a number of houses along the river. it's a great example of how you could put a portable battery library next to that, and then folks who are still living in their residences while they're cleaning up could utilize those for power tool recharging and stuff like that. You can hit the next slide, Zareen. Thanks. This is another National Guard base camp up in the mountains. That trailer that we drove up was on a one-lane road where the other road, half of the road, was washed into the river. That trailer is still deployed out here in Western North Carolina. It's been moved a couple times to support various relief hubs as they kind of grow and then shrink or move or coalesce as people's volunteer needs, and then people living in the area that are trying to get back into their homes change their living dynamics, which is one of the kind of nuanced elements of long-term recovery that we've seen in both in the Gulf and then in Hawaii with in Maui and housing shortages, and now here it's happening in North Carolina. You can hit the next slide. I just love this story because it's a direct example of how the community lighthouse projects and our work kind of like feed or dovetail, or how we work together really effectively in disaster power outages. So on the left is the First Grace United Methodist Church, which is about a mile from my house. During Hurricane Francine, which was I think 2 or 3 weeks before Hurricane Helene, it was a Cat 2. I was staying in my house. We have a warehouse in Metairie, which is about 10 minutes away from my house. The community lighthouse at First Grace islanded. Their power stayed on because of the storm, because they had investment ahead of the storm in the lighthouse microgrid model, and we just delivered mobile batteries over from our warehouse in Metairie. They stocked them and then distributed them to folks in the neighborhood that had home health needs, and just to take back at night so they could run their CPAP or their oxygen concentrator or a fan, or kind of just basic home health needs, fridge if they have insulin. It's just a really effective way for us to, we're a small team, and the Together New Orleans Community Lighthouse folks have a lot of people, and so if we can get these mobile units into the community lighthouses quickly after a storm where the storm has hit, right, whether it's Western Louisiana or New Orleans or wherever, it just works really well. And then we took them back after the end of the 3-day power outage, charged them back up in our warehouse, and all these units were then redeployed to Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina 2 weeks later. And I think those ones are still in rotation out in the Western North Carolina area. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. Another battery library that we set up in partnership with Together New Orleans and Together Louisiana after the Araby tornado. You just click a couple. I don't remember which photos we threw in here at this point. We are running as fast as we can, but great, this is my last slide, and then we'll have hopefully plenty of time for questions for both our groups. This is kind of the way I think about like our timeline. So on the left, moving to the right, like there's a disaster that happens, and then we deploy and rapidly deliver turnkey clean tech equipment, meaning portable solar generators, atmospheric water generators, shelter systems, whatever we have left in our inventory. We get it to local first responders, second responders, and resilience hubs so they can work, do their job better, right? That's step one. You can click through. Step two is we keep that stuff working for the people who need it as long as they need it. And if they call and say, our power came back, or our site is growing and actually your portable battery, we need a bigger battery, we'll swap it out and expand the service on that site. And we keep the units running. And then as the response kind of moves into long-term recovery or early recovery and then long-term resilience in that weeks to months phase, every time we respond, we're receiving more kind of loose clean tech donations from the microgrid industry or other kind of climate tech industries. So we're starting to open what we call free stores in the weeks to months phase after a disaster that will stock, for example, in here in Western North Carolina, we received a number of inverter donations, lots of solar panels, wiring, charge controllers, breakers, and conduit, just kind of like loose, the stuff in the electrical aisle of Home Depot or Lowe's. And we're kind of what we're trying to do here is lower the costs of renewable recovery for groups that are going to be building or looking to build lighthouses or other mobile projects or resilience hubs in the region ahead of the next storm. And then finally, on the kind of the months to years, as part of the long-term recovery, we focus on training, educating, and organizing the local groups that we supported in the initial phase with training to self-deploy their own clean tech equipment for future disasters. So that's kind of how our kind of spin back up to the top for the next disaster and do it all over again. And that's what we're doing in LA right now. We are hoping we'll get a couple months to rest and kind of prep ourselves before hurricane season, which starts in June. But we are committed to being there when we're needed. And I think the matchmaking between the permanent facility lighthouse type microgrids and then mobile or deployable infrastructure can really save lives and reduce suffering in the trying times that we're seeing affect so many people across the country. So we're really grateful for the opportunity to talk about what we do, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions. And Josh, just thanks for all y'all do too. We just can't do this stuff alone. So CG, thanks for letting us use technical assistance fund money to figure out how to build new mobile systems, and we'll together kind of support folks where and when they need it.
Awesome. Thank you both. Josh, if you want to hop back on now, we are going to try to optimize our Q&A time as best as we can. This is one of the best question responses we've had from an audience in a while. We have dozens and dozens and dozens of questions. So I tried to pick the ones that were repeated the most, but if you have a specific question for either of our panelists or for Clean Energy Group, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm always happy to coordinate with them after this webinar as well. So one thing I wanted to start with is this is kind of selfishly a response from me, from Clean Energy Group. A couple questions that we got repeatedly were, does battery storage only provide benefits in the event of an outage? So can you only have battery storage? That it doesn't have environmental benefits, it doesn't have benefits year round. So I just wanted to highlight that stationary battery storage, at least from that perspective where Clean Energy Group has been working the most, and it would be great to hear from Will and Josh on this as well. There's major benefits to battery storage beyond resilience, right? Resilience is a huge one, but there's environmental benefits because from solar self-consumption, you can maintain and use your own solar energy much better than selling it to the grid if that's an option for you, depending on the economics of the system. It also helps with the grid services, help avoid future investments in fossil fuel powered infrastructure, right? So if you have these huge peaker power plants or other ways that utilities are trying to justify putting up like a gas power plant or an oil power plant to be able to meet demand, distributed energy resources, including battery storage, can help offset that need or reduce the need, right? And we're seeing a lot of, CEG has a peaker power coalition that specifically works to either shut down or stop the new development of peaker power plants. So there are major environmental benefits. Grid services provide economic benefits and also improve resilience for all customers, so that even if you're not able to have solar and storage at your own facility, you can benefit from a more reliable and resilient grid. All of these are huge indicators, and they're starting to see more and more studies come out, especially out of Vermont, where the utility there is seeing hundreds and hundreds and upwards of $1 million in savings for all ratepayers by just offsetting times of peak demand with their distributed energy network. So I wanted to highlight that because we are focusing on resilience for this webinar, which is equally as important, but just so you know, there are environmental and economic benefits of battery storage as well. Okay, so let's start with question for both of you. What, for the lighthouses and then for the mobile solar and storage, what's the average size of a system, or is it wholly dependent on who you're working with?
So for us, it's wholly dependent on who we're working with. We've also got some local regulations that are sort of connected to our energy utility that that sort of limit size. So, for instance, in some of those pictures that that I showed, uh, there was a lot more surface area on the roof than there were solar panels, and so. So the short answer is obviously this can get complicated pretty quickly, but the short answer is that it's dependent upon the building and it's also dependent upon the local regulations.
And just to jump in on the mobile side, the largest battery thing I'm aware of is a company out of Vermont, actually, Mariel, that called Nomad, and they I think have put 2 MWh on wheels, which is nuts and great. I'm very excited about it. I want to play with one in person, but I've yet to see it. So it is you can put a lot of battery storage on a mobile frame, right? It's not that, or in a container or a shipping container. Um, the deployability of that from a disaster response or kind of tactical perspective can be, you need a bigger forklift or a lull. It starts to get, you need a CDL to move it. Like there starts to be some just delivery setup, maintenance, mobilization challenges that kind of depend. Are you doing this with volunteers or are you doing this with contracted licensed electricians, right? So we kind of think about that line. At which point are we not are we going to contract this installation out to a local provider, like in New Orleans Solar Alternatives or Posigen, or in Asheville there's a number of groups we worked with, kind of how to build that map of installers that can do we need a licensed electrician for this one. Anytime we're going to wire any mobile assets into a permanent facility as a temporary setup, like a backup generator, we're going to use a state licensed electrician. We're not going to do that with volunteers. But yeah, the sizes can really vary significantly. The smallest portable systems are like the little cell phone chargers you get at, Walmart, or you can buy at Walgreens or in the airport. And actually, I remember, Josh, the Together New Orleans folks went out during the Airbnb tornado and bought like a couple hundred of those, and then we set up a trailer, and then folks could show up to the trailer, check out a little cell phone charger, and then bring it back the next day and swap it. And it's just like really, I'm just, I know there are challenges, and there's always pros and cons to clean tech. This is not a one size fits all or a perfect model, but um, lithium-based battery storage is changing the game for relief and recovery for and saving lives. And it's way better, way safer, way more sustainable than gas and diesel generators. It just is.
Yeah, that's another good point, that for every battery storage installation that you're using in the event of an outage, you're not using a diesel or gas generator, or you're using it in tandem with one, which is hugely beneficial to the environment, to health, to all those things. Another question for both of you. Is there a job training or workforce development aspect to either of your programs? I'll start with you, Josh.
Yes. So, we see solar as an opportunity to make sure that we're building clean jobs that will pay family sustaining wages. And so a huge part of the sort of community organizing effort was bringing in labor on the front end. So we've got a longstanding partnership with IBEW, but that only works when you've got the jobs, right? How do you actually even train workers to even be ready to take on apprenticeships? And so we've got partnerships with a couple of nonprofits who do workforce development here in New Orleans. The biggest partnership is with a nonprofit called Louisiana Green Corps, that has a whole vertical dedicated to taking young people from no knowledge about solar and other green types of jobs, all the way through to connection with an employer or a long-term apprenticeship with an entity like IBEW. So, the workforce development component is a huge piece here. And it's got to be done intentionally, because if it isn't done intentionally, we're just going to actually recreate the same inequalities that already exist. And then the last thing that I'll say on this point is kind of something that Will mentioned, which is in order for this technology to truly scale and to become like ubiquitous, we need more trained installers. Like there are a dearth of solar contractors who can do this work and who can do it at a high level dependably. It's far easier to go find someone to build a home for you than it is to actually find someone to install a solar array. And so, this is a huge area for growth in the coming decades.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, I'm so glad that y'all are trying to crack this thing, because to be honest, like, we want to try to do work. We need to train more people how to deploy mobile sustainable infrastructure to climate disaster. Like, we need them in LA right now. We could use 10 people in Asheville that know how to do this. Like, and the reality is that we're one of the Footprint project, at least, is one of the few groups that are like hiring mobile solar technician. Like, if you Google mobile solar microgrid technician, there's not a lot of job, to be honest. Like, on the mobile side, there's a dearth of employment. There's a lot of solar companies that are hiring for permanent, solar array installers, microgrid design technicians, engineers, permitting, all that stuff. There's the market for mobile microgrids is kind of film, live events, construction, and then often disasters, and that's where we kind of focus. So I would love to say that we have a robust workforce development program that's training more folks to do this, but reality, we just don't have the capacity, and we're not funded for it right now. Our funding is focused on getting the equipment out the door during the disaster, and until I mean, if anyone's listening and want to help us figure out how to develop a mobile, sustainable tech workforce dev program for disaster resilience, please reach out, because we need folks. We just don't have the capacity to both train, deploy, and support during long-term responses. We just don't have the internal capacity yet.
Sorry about that. Great, super helpful. So on the kind of financial side of things, as part of this process of when you're working with folks to actually build these systems, are we looking at like these are totally grant funded, these are financed? Is there any sort of comparison when you're working, I guess, Will, in your aspect with like a municipality or a first responder, and Josh, when you're working with an actual like hub facility, in comparing and contrasting the cost of like this is what solar and storage would cost versus maintaining, operating, and refilling a diesel generator, right? So like how does that factor in? And then what are the financing protocols you use, or is it all grant funded?
Josh, you
Great
want to take
question.
it?
Sure, sure. So the simple answer is that it is a capital stack. It is a stack of different types of dollars that all add up to 100%. And I'll start from the base of the stack. The largest amount is uh, incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act. So depending on the type of project and where it is and who it's serving, some projects are eligible for up to a 70% rebate. So, imagine starting a project knowing that you're going to get 70% of the money back if you're able to complete it. That's kind of a game changer from a financing standpoint. Then you layer on top of that state or local incentives. Here in New Orleans, the municipality has been, making like really long-term investments in solar, and so that is a level of the capital stack. Then, since you've got those two incentives, it becomes much easier to get debt, and debt becomes a useful part of the way to fund these arrays because uh, without getting too complicated, you need debt in order to get the rebate, right, from the federal government. And then finally, there is sometimes a gap, right? Sometimes there isn't a gap. Those three sources are enough, but sometimes there's a gap, and then that's where philanthropy, jumps into place. But when it comes to like actually funding projects, I mean, this is such an exciting moment because never have there been that many, sort of ready-made pieces of capital to do a project. It's easier than it's ever been.
Yeah, No, it's really exciting time, and I our capital stack is kind of looks the I'd say like take everything that Josh said and then flip it around, because what we're doing is taking a lot of corporate sponsorship money and individual donations and grants, a lot of philanthropic capital of various forms, buying stuff, buying mobile tech, and tossing it out into a messy disaster, getting it to the right sites, sharing those stories with the broader audience, and then trying to basically backfill all of that all that tech and generators and panel, all that stuff ahead of the next storm. So disaster finance is a very we're not taking state or federal or FEMA dollars yet to do this. That money moves a very different way than the IRA or DOE or other types of federal dollars. And so our stack is very much a like, how can we take philanthropic dollars, layer in-kind donations from a variety of tech companies to create mobile microgrids that then can be rapidly deployed to power outage disasters. We are, for example, in LA, starting to rent equipment from mobile solar rental companies. So in LA right now, there's two groups that offer mobile solar batteries as a rentable service to the film industry, which is fantastic. That means we don't have to necessarily buy, build, deploy ourselves. We can just use the donations coming in for LA and rent equipment from a variety of mobile of local industry partners, which also jumpstarts the local economy, and we want to be supporting local sustainable industries whenever possible in the aftermath of a disaster. So very weird. Our financial stack is a little bit different, but whatever gets the stuff out there, right?
I wanted to give a heads up. It's 2 o'clock, and I know, Josh, you had a hard stop at 2, so thank you so much for joining us. If anyone wants to hang out a couple minutes, I'm going to ask Will just a couple footprint project specific questions, but we will be sharing a recording of this video after it's all said and done, and you can also access it on our website. So thanks so much, Josh. We'll say goodbye to you first. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
So, Will, since you had a couple extra minutes and I literally
Sure.
didn't even get through the list of shared questions, I thought I'd ask a couple footprints project specific questions that we got in.
Awesome.
Couple questions about how you worked with folks in Texas. If you worked with folks in Texas after the extreme cold spell in 2021,
Yeah.
did the response look differently there when you were working in Texas? Was there participation with the utility or municipalities or first responders? What did that response look like, if it's applicable? If you didn't respond, then just let us know and I can go to a different question.
Yeah, it was applicable. We did respond. I think that was 2020, 2020 or
2021.
2021, early 2021, right? Yeah. Oh my gosh, it feels like a decade ago. We did respond, but we were much, much smaller then. So our response looked like sending a couple portable solar generators to local fire station and emergency manager folks out there that we had been connected to prior. And then in that winter storm, we also have a close partner that goes by the name of ITDRC, Information Technology Disaster Resource Center. And they do basically, if we do free power in disasters, they do free Wi-Fi, and those work really well together because Wi-Fi doesn't take a lot of power. It's not like running a heater, and comms is always desperately needed during a disaster. So we supported a number of their trailers that they were deploying with mobile tech. The reality is winter storms are really, really, in terms of we're getting this request right now in Asheville where it's about 30 to 40 degrees right now, and it's going to drop to 10. And there's still, people are living in sheds and in tents and all of the messy long-term recovery housing crisis stuff that falls on the back of a community in the aftermath of a major disaster. Running heat off of a battery is a really, really hard, you need a really big battery to get through the night if you're going to plug in an electric heater for a tiny house or a shed or a tent. It's much more effective to pair it with a gas generator and run it as a hybrid, or basically like a portable Prius, if you kind of think about it like that, which is what the fire command folks and the EOC, emergency operations folks in winter storm Erie and Texas were doing with the portable systems that we sent. So they knew that if they were going to do a heat, they'd bring a gas generator, use the gas generator to charge the battery, turn off the gas generator to conserve fuel, use the battery for heat or other applications, and then turn back on that generator, or have it auto start if they could figure out the wiring to make that work. But winter storms are really, I mean, I think about Vermont or Minnesota, where I'm originally from. A major power outage disaster in a winter context would be devastating. Would be hugely complicated, and one of the reasons we're doing most of our work in the Gulf South, in Puerto Rico, in Southern California now, or in Hawaii, is that solar and batteries work better in nicer climate, like in warmer, and it's easier to power air conditioning than it is to power heat by a long shot. So there are heat waves are less scary to me. If I think about power outage deaths related to disasters, a heat wave scares me less than a mass a winter storm power outage.
All right, and that's super helpful. I never actually thought of it like that, but you're interesting perspective. The last question that I'm going to throw your way, because we got it a lot, was Footprint Project works in mobile battery storage. How do you work? Does your program or kind of things you're exploring for the future, how do EVs factor in? Whether it's EV vehicles, EV batteries, what are you kind of seeing there? And is it a component of your work, or do you think it will be?
We would love to make it a really big component of the work, because EVs have really big batteries on wheels. It's like an obvious. I love that question. We've talked to a group called Highland Fleets, which is a school bus EV company. I think they're based in they had a pilot with Schneider Electric in Maryland, I believe. Please, someone fact check me on that. But they have, buses have 300 kilowatt hour batteries on wheels, and school buses are a great example of, hey, they don't really use a lot of them in the summer, so maybe right around hot weather events or heat hurricanes, we could use school buses to plug them into buildings via a transfer switch or a grid islandable wiring inverter. There are some technical challenges to, like, it gets very, I'm not an engineer, and I want to be like, it is possible. It's just like the devil's in all the details of how that works and what regulations are available. And I think a lot of folks here probably are tracking like the V to X space, like the vehicle to, whether it's G for grid or L for load or X for something else. Like, what else are we going to plug into our mobile battery cars? It's really exciting. And I think the only coin that I'd say, like, having a lot of batteries on wheels that are drivable, roundable, is going to be great for resilience, with the one caveat that if there's no place to charge that battery on wheels, it becomes a massive paperweight and a threat to the road safety on the evacuation routes during a disaster. So I think emergency managers, or the disaster people of the world, are looking at EVs in an equal playing field of, like, could be great because people could harbor shelter in their homes without having a microgrid if they could just run an extension cord to their Ford F-150 Lightning and plug in their refrigerator, right? And run their air conditioning for a day, and then the grid comes back up and we're back to normal. But take a scenario like New Orleans, where you would need to evacuate people, and there's not enough charging infrastructure along the route to evacuation, and emergency managers look at that and are very scared, right? Because there's if the bridge out of New Orleans is a 2-lane bridge one direction, 4 lanes if they opened it and said everyone have to go out, a couple EVs that run out of gas and get pushed to the side, that can create a huge congestion issue on the evacuation routes. And it's really hard. It's hard to bring a tank of a, you know what I mean? Like, you can have an extra gas can in your truck if your gas runs out. You can bring a portable battery on your EV, but that's a very, very, very small gas can. You know what I mean? It's going to get you like 5 more miles along the road. So it's, from an emergency management perspective, it's a double-edged sword, is the fact. And we've gotten requests after the Ohio tornadoes last year. We got a request from local emergency managers for EV charging. we got the request to our email. Do you have anything that can power electric vehicles? Because people are unable to evacuate because the grid's down and their electric vehicle drained over the course of a day. And then the power outage is still out. They decide they need to evacuate and they can't get out. And I just think I love renewables. I think we desperately need to decarbonize, but if we need to approach it in a way that's just honest about the capacities and limitations of the tech. And I'm super excited about like hybrid. We are not purists, right? Like if someone's on oxygen and the power's out, if the generator is the only thing they can get and that's what's there and there's gas, like, we're going to run the generator. We were on site in Asheville and there was a relief, a medical hub that had 2 gas generators powering 40 people's oxygen and CPAP and ventilators, and we showed up and we set up a solar charging station just as a backup. We didn't move any of the critical loads over. They didn't know when they were going to get fuel again, so we set up a microgrid just in case the fuel supply chain failed that night. But we did not say, we're going to move all your extension cords over to the solar now, because that, from an emergency management perspective, that is not appropriate. So I just think we need to be really honest with people about where the tech is, where we're hoping to get it to. And then as these disasters increase in frequency and severity, we need to know that, hey, if we can't charge EVs, it's good in theory, but bad in practice. And we got to figure out solutions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, first off, in managing expectations and not being a purist, we support plenty of projects through our technical assistance fund that prioritize solar and storage and use their existing diesel generator as part of a hybrid system because they all work better together, right? Rather than being on 2 separate lines. I think the technology is capable of whatever you want it to be capable of, but the economics of it are different, right? Even with the ITC and things like that, there's only so in the size of how large these batteries get. So I think that's a really important point. And I also, EVs are complicated because a lot of EV charging areas are getting installed in low-income communities, communities of color, places that do not have access to EV or do not utilize EVs as much as higher wealth communities. So it's getting a little exploitative. And how can that be framed in a way that actually benefits the community? So I think EVs are amazing. I want an EV, but realizing the limitations and the complications with equity related to those is really important and probably a great topic for another webinar. So we will have you on again soon. I wanted to thank Will and all of you for attending. I should have made this webinar an hour and a half. We will next time. If I didn't get to your question, which I probably didn't, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll connect you with whoever can best answer it. My email is right here. And check out our website. I think, Zareen, if there's another slide, we have one more webinar coming up. Yes, so we have the State of U.S. Energy Storage Industry 2024 in review and a look ahead to 2025. I highlight this because I got a lot of questions that were like, what about the ITC? What about direct pay? What's going to happen? And although none of us can really predict the future, this webinar is a really great way to start having that conversation, see where we've come in the past year and where we might be going, what are some kind of things you can think of. So this is one of our most popular webinars of the year. I really suggest everyone either register for it and join, or at least get an update once it's been recorded for you to listen in. Thank you so much for attending. Thanks again, Will, and we will talk to you all soon. Have a great rest of your day.